I would like to introduce Maureen Collins, the Community Relations Coordinator for Rosecrance Health Network. Maureen?
Thanks, Molly. Welcome, everyone. We want to take a minute also to thank the McHenry County Chamber and Molly for organizing this. We're always very excited to be part of sharing our expertise and education with the Chamber. Molly, if you just want to share the screen real quick, I'm going to give everybody a very brief update on who and what Rosecrance Health Network is. We're celebrating our 104th year this year in Rosecrance. And Rosecrance is a provider of treatment for substance use and mental health. And more importantly, we have 3 different sites here in McHenry County. So if you are an employer and your employees are needing assistance or their family members, Molly, you can go to the next slide. We do a variety of mental health assessments, both for adults, child and family. We also have a mobile crisis response, and we have a recovery program here. One of our sites is our Rosecrance Dakota Clinic, which is located in the Mental Health Board building. Next slide, Molly. We also have a recovery home in Woodstock, Illinois, that's a transitional living for people who are starting their journey of recovery, and this is for adults. Next slide, Molly. So if you do need a higher level of care and you would not necessarily seek treatment from an intensive outpatient program, much would be like a daily program, we have 2 facilities in Rockford, Illinois that are our residential treatment program. The one on your screen right now, our Rosecrance Griffin William campus, is a 78-bed treatment center, and we treat 12 to 20 who have primary substance use and or behavioral health issues. Molly, next slide. So this is another one. We can support teams. We do free assessments. Again, residential treatment for both mental health and substance use. We have a school within our residential program, and we do have family education support as well. Molly? For adults who are needing treatment, we do have a 90-bed treatment facility in Rockford as well. And this is for anyone 18 or older who has a primary diagnosis of substance use disorder. We are a Medicaid provider, one of the few left in the state, and we also do take commercial insurance. So these are good resources to know. We never really know about resources until we need them and we're in crisis. So Molly will make sure that this information is posted on the website for the McHenry County Chamber. And next slide, Molly. And one more. This is where you can reach us. If you can go to rosecrance.org, Molly will also have my contact information. I'm also a social worker in addition to doing the community relations. So all calls are confidential. And just remember, Rosecrance is here in the county and we're here to support you. So today I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Mary Egan. Mary is the Director of Outreach for Rosecrance Health Network and has over 35 years experience with working with individuals in the substance use. And we're very pleased to say that her husband, Jim, has been able to join us today. Jim is a partner at Keefe, Campbell, and Biery and Associates in Chicago. And so Mary and Jim, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me. And rather than waste excuse me, a lot of time introducing myself and all that stuff, that's been done. I'll get right to it since I've been told I'm going to get the hook at like 25 till or something like that. The title of my presentation is the Cannabis in the Workplace, the Legal Considerations. Now that retail marijuana as well as medical marijuana have been legalized in the state of Illinois over the last couple of years, it's becoming a more increasing concern. First thing, the most important thing we like to point out to people is that marijuana remains illegal under federal law. Okay, so if your company falls under Department of Transportation or any other federal contractors, you must follow federal law. and the federal government does not care that Illinois now allows legal personal use. So you can use that as part of your policy in your, whether you're a federal contractor or not, you can use the federal statute as your guideline to set up a drug-free workplace environment. Medical marijuana was legalized a couple years ago, and basically what that says is that you cannot discriminate on someone based on the fact that they might use marijuana medicinally. Okay, so you can't refuse to rent them property. You can't necessarily refuse to employ them unless, we'll get into factors in that regard soon enough. You can't discriminate against someone for having a medical marijuana prescription unless it's going to put you in violation of federal law or other federal financing or status or licensing. Okay. Recreational marijuana, or more appropriately, I suppose, retail marijuana, was enacted at the beginning of this year. It was signed last year and took effect this year. The important thing to take away is that you as an employer, excuse me, can still have a zero tolerance or drug-free workplace. And we, of course, as attorney, recommend that you do so. Nothing in the law requires that you allow employees to be under the influence or use marijuana in the workplace. The same as you wouldn't let them drink while they're working. It limits your discipline or termination. It doesn't limit your ability to terminate employees for violating your employment policy, but you must actually have a drug-free workplace in order to enforce a policy like that. We're going to get into that some more as we go on, but realistically, if it's a drug-free workplace, that means everybody's drug-free. That means I can't smoke weed in my office if I'm not letting everybody else smoke weed in the office as well, and we don't. Zero tolerance. Illinois is a little different from some states. Illinois, in the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, left open the question of whether you could discharge someone for smoking, partaking in marijuana when they're off duty. Some states actually expect the employer to enact whatever policies they want, whether it's on or off the job usage. Illinois explicitly protects the employee's right to consume marijuana while they're off work. Okay, there's certain exceptions to this that we're going to come to as we go along, but realistically, once they're off duty and once they're out of the company vehicle or whatever it is, they're sitting at home or they're off work because they're working at home, but they're not working anymore, they can partake at that point. When can employers consider an employee impaired? You're going to get a lot more about this in the next presentation from Mary, but you have to, importantly, the point I want to make is you have to have a good faith belief, and you have to be able to recognize articulable symptoms. Okay, lessening of job performance, inability to speak, carelessness in operating equipment, general disregard for safety, involvement in an accident. Okay, now an employee has the right to contest any kind of discipline you enact for marijuana use, and that's where we're going to get into the whole aspect of testing and stuff as we go on. But you have to be able to articulate a good faith belief. You can't just say, "Well, I think he's high," because I think he gets high at night. Statute does protect employers on issues like having a drug testing policy, disciplining for use on the premises. Again, you have to have that reasonable good faith belief. After every accident, we're going to come onto this again. After every accident, you're going to want to be doing drug testing, urine screens, for alcohol or marijuana or opioids. You can discipline employees, but again, you have to have that good faith belief. that they violated your policy by using or possessing marijuana at work. And they have to know what your policy is. Employers cannot discipline employees for using legal products that are legal under state law outside of working orders, so working hours. Important distinction of them saying legal under state law is that protects employers that are under the auspices of Federal Department of Regulation or other federal guidelines. Police and firefighters are not protected under this act. They're not allowed to be smoking and partaking at any time. You do have the right to continue drug testing and prohibiting working under the influence. You're allowed to maintain a reasonable zero tolerance or drug-free workplace environment. And don't limit it just obviously cannabis. You want to include alcohol or any other drugs. And that's what we're pointing out at the bottom of the slide. Treat marijuana like any other drug or alcohol. Workplace is not just the employer's building. The prohibition includes any building, property, parking lot, company vehicle, whether leased, rented, or owned. And the workplace, you can further define it under your workplace policy. In our current situation where so many people are working at home these days, this creates an interesting conundrum. You can't discipline somebody for using cannabis while they're at home not working. Can you prohibit them from using it while they're working? I contend you can. Now, we don't have any case law right now where this has been litigated, but I'm sure it's going to come up under the workers' compensation venues, soon enough. I mean, if they're not going to be allowed to use cannabis on your premises or while they're working, driving company vehicles, they certainly can't be getting high while they're working. Tricky part there is going to be, catching somebody and proving it, I suppose. But you can, in your employment policy, if they work at home, prohibit them from using any substances, alcohol, drugs, cannabis while they're working, even if it's at home. Nothing in the act creates a cause of action against an employer for following their reasonable workplace drug policies, including but not limited to subjecting employees to reasonable drug testing, alcohol testing, and reasonable and non-discriminatory random drug testing. They removed language regarding discipline for refusing to be tested. It still needs it to be in your policy, but you do have a right to discipline in your work policy. You just have to make sure it's spelled out in your policy, and at all times document everything you're doing. The reasons why you sent someone out for a drug test, whether it was an accident or a random, whatever it is, and then how did it come to pass that they the positive drug test, and then the disciplinary proceedings started. You are allowed to perform pre-employment drug testing. Once you've made a job offer, a potential employee can be tested. Now, and you refuse to hire them for smoking marijuana off the at home. Realistically, they clearly were high, and the THC concentrations prove that when they took the drug test, the pre-employment physical, then you probably can. Again, this hasn't been litigated at that point as far as we know it today. A general positive test only indicates that they were consuming a substance that was legal that is legal under state law. So just a positive test on its own isn't going to show they were impaired. Now, if you're an employer, again, that receives federal funding, or you have to follow Department of Transportation guidelines, any positive drug test can be used to withdraw the offer of employment. And if someone fails a drug test, you do have the right to withdraw the offer. Now, again, if it's just simply the drug test proves that they smoked marijuana 2 days ago, yesterday afternoon, and now it's today, the litigation is unclear. It hasn't been litigated at this point. However, I would propose that you probably can't. The state is probably going to frown on you discriminating against someone who smoked marijuana legally at home, unless, again, you are receiving some form of federal funding. Marijuana testing use levels isn't the same as alcohol. Now, again, this is another one you're going to hear a lot more about in the next presentation, but alcohol dissipates within 12 hours or so, where marijuana remains in your system for weeks, weeks upon weeks. So a positive test alone isn't sufficient evidence to discipline someone or to prove that they're not able to, that they're under the influence. We recommend you adopt the Illinois Vehicle Code measure, where if there exists a cannabinol concentration of 5 nanograms or more in whole blood, or 10 nanograms or more in other bodily substances, it's presumed the individual is under the influence. Testing levels come below those measures, there's no presumption of being under the influence. And now you need to bring in other evidence to show how the person may have been affected by the marijuana, and we're back into those reasonable suspicion. The Illinois Work Comp Act in 2011 was amended to make the use of any alcohol or illegal drugs not prescribed a significant issue. If someone tests positive for cannabis, alcohol, or other prescription drugs that they're not prescribed to be taking, it becomes the burden of proof is on them to demonstrate the injury wasn't due to the alcohol or drug use. Typically, it is up to the employee to demonstrate that their accident was caused while at work through the reasonable course of their job duties. Once they are tested positive, there's a presumption that now that the injury wasn't due to work, but it was due to the drug or alcohol use. So it's up to them then to prove that the impairment did not cause the accident. How do we look at that? Well, typically, someone's just walking along, the example I use often, somebody's walking along the job site, construction site, or wherever, and something falls from a window, somebody drops something from a scaffold hits them in the head, the body, and they're injured. The fact that they were high isn't going to be the cause of that accident. By the same token, someone that's bumbling along and steps into an obvious hazard, they're going to have a more difficult time proving that the accident was not caused by the drug use or the alcohol or drug use. Drug testing requirements are very employee friendly. The Workers' Compensation Act made it very challenging uh, to use your drug samples. You have to create a chain of custody, and your OC health provider or your testing facility must be able to follow these guidelines. Urine samples have to be kept in certain levels and certain temperatures. There has to be chain of custody forms that shows who touched it last and where it was, and that it's always been in that containment facility before it was taken out by this person who took it and delivered it to court or wherever it was handled next. Sample containers and bags have to meet certain requirements. Split samples must be taken. An employee needs to be notified of a positive test. And most importantly, and probably the hardest thing, is that samples have to be kept for 3 years, and the facility must be able to provide a sample to the employee if requested. Recommendations for enforcing and perfecting a denial of a workers' comp benefits after a positive drug test. Again, you want, it goes along with any bit of workers' compensation, that your occupational health providers are aware of what you do and how you conduct your business. And one of the many things they need to be aware of is your drug and alcohol policy, so that they will be in position to document any symptoms they objectively see. And beyond the positive drug test, how the person smelled when they walked in, they smelled alcohol or marijuana, whatever the case may be, however they were acting. You want your health providers, they're working with you. You want to be in a team environment with your health providers, so they know what you're looking for, whether it be in examinations about injuries, and with the aspect of intoxication and monitoring your drug-free environment. When any incident's reported, you should require a drug test in some form. So someone's hurt on the job, as part of the OC health, the examination with the OC health provider, they should be performing a drug screen. Again, in order to effectively use those test results at an arbitration, we have to be able to demonstrate proper handling and chain of custody of the sample, so we can demonstrate the accuracy and the integrity of the testing. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, a positive or negative screen is not enough. It could be, again, in the case of marijuana, that it's clear they were smoking Saturday, Sunday, last Friday. We don't know, but because of the cannabinol levels, it's clear they weren't smoking now. Very often we retain experts to review this, initially just the screen itself, and most of us in the industry now are getting smart enough to know what we're reading when we see the screen, when we see the report, to turn it over to a medical professional to provide an opinion on whether the party was under the influence at the time of the accident. And even still, as I said, a positive screen is not enough necessarily to always win a case. So any witness statements, videos supporting or photographs supporting the claim of intoxication. Many companies now in warehouse type buildings, they have all kinds of security cameras everywhere. Anytime somebody's injured, you want to see those videos of the area where they were injured in, if they're available. You want to adopt a policy about prescription medication and impairing substances as part of your safety policy. You want to require all of your employees in a safety sensitive classification to disclose if they're taking any prescription or other substances which could affect performance. You don't necessarily have to tell you what drug or medical condition they're taking. or what drug they're taking or medical condition they have. But if they're working in a safety sensitive position, driving heavy equipment, um, um, and other classifications that are laid out in the ADA, you have a right to ask them if they are using substances that could affect performance, and not let them perform those jobs. It should be part of your safety policy. Once someone has disclosed to you that they use a substance, we encourage you to have your employees talk to their physician with a copy of the job description, see if this will affect their performance. But you do have the right to make the final decision on whether you can take this position or not. You want to update your job descriptions to comply, so that you comply with the Americans with Disability Act, and incorporate their essential job functions. If someone's working in a safety sensitive job, as I just mentioned, the essential functions should be listed so that the employee knows that they're required to be able to be in a constant state of alertness and perform the job duties in a safe manner. You don't want your truck drivers, your delivery men, crane operators, what have you, anybody using heavy equipment to be less than alert at all times. Educate yourself in the workplace related impairing effects of marijuana. Again, Mary's going to be talking about this soon, and we talked about it earlier. But drowsiness, increased drowsiness, fatigue, inability to gauge length of time and distance, things like that. Inability to cope with sudden changes in surrounding surrounding emergency situations and such. Loss of balance. All these things Mary is going to be talking about shortly. How best to deal with medical and personal use of marijuana? Don't. Have a drug-free workplace and enforce it. Ban marijuana from your workplace. Like I said, you should have all alcohol and drug-free environment in your workplace at all times. If you don't do it ahead of time and change your if you haven't changed your policy already, you want to change your policy before you get in a situation where somebody said, "Well, nobody told me I couldn't get high at work. It's not in our it's not in our handbook. It's not posted anywhere." So you need to do that as soon as practical. Safety legal issues involving marijuana are pretty much the same as opioid use. If you know someone who works, the employer is aware that one of their employees uses marijuana regularly, and they're allowing them to operate heavy equipment, you could be in or other safety sensitive type jobs, you might put yourself in a position where someone could sue you because you should have reasonably expected your workers, the results of the conduct of your workers. So again, your delivery driver shouldn't be allowed to smoke marijuana while he's driving, or use any kind of opioids, things like that. Again, the broken record aspect of this, ban medical marijuana, personal use marijuana, opioids from your workplace as you would with alcohol. We've kind of talked about this a lot. I won't spend a lot of time on it. If your company isn't alcohol and drug free, start now. You know, nobody wants to allow impaired workers onto your work site. Anyone who's drinking, getting high is not only not productive, but dangerous. So you want a drug and alcohol-free workplace. And the federal appellate court says that if you if a worker won't test for drugs or alcohol, you don't have to keep them employed. So work on your testing protocols. Make federal statutory guidelines your guidelines. Even though the state allows marijuana use outside the workplace, the federal government obviously doesn't recognize marijuana at all at this point in time. We don't know where that's going to go. It could change in a few years, but right now, don't allow it. So follow the federal guidelines and enact a policy that prohibits all use of marijuana on the premises. As I said in the very beginning, unfortunately, you can't create a policy that's unless you are under the DOT or a police officer, a firefighter, and the like. You're not allowed to prohibit people from using marijuana on their free time, but it doesn't mean you can't be very strict on your workplace. How do you make employees aware of your policy, especially if it's a new policy? Well, when you're interviewing people, you make them aware of it right then. You have the policy in your handbook and have it a sign-off sheet as when you give someone any kind of employment policy, employee handbook, that they have to sign off that they understand and have reviewed the various policies, and specifically drug and alcohol policies. If you don't have a handbook, it should be posted not just on the one in that one break room area where everybody puts all their employment guideline notices. Drug-free, substance-free work environments should be posted all over the place. If you do performance reviews, it should be part of the you should be giving them refreshers on policies like this. At company meetings, safety meetings, whatever you do to go over policy and talk about how work is performed, you can use those as an opportunity to put out a drug policy again. And after any kind of accident, of course, who qualifies under the policy? Everybody. Anybody that works part-time, full-time, whatever, they should all be included in this policy. Under the influence, recent use, again, I've been over this already. You need to know the articulable symptoms, and we're going to go over those soon. Once again, have guidelines for when what the test levels are, the when and how of testing. Pre-employment testing, you should be, once you've made the job offer, you should still be testing for marijuana as well as opioids and whatnot. You can set up random testing, and your third-party administrator, your insurance company, can help you with this to have a truly random drug test. And to do that, avoid predictability. But like I said, the TPAs can assist you with that. Post-accident, after any accident, everybody involved in the accident should be tested. Okay. You can't make any exceptions. Once you start making exceptions because Jim's a good guy, we're not going to test him, he would never do this, that voids the whole policy. Then you're never going to be able to enforce it in court. Any return to duty from whether it be an accident, any kind of an injury, have a return to work physical and another test. Reasonable suspicion, we've talked about, and you're going to hear about it again very soon. How do you enforce this policy and enforce it across the board? It's very someone's high, they're disciplined, whether it be through termination or suspension. You follow the policy that you've developed. I'm not going to really talk about opioids. I probably should have cut the slide out since we're talking about marijuana. Just understand that there are some instances where doctors are starting to prescribe medical marijuana instead of as an alternative to opioids. I know doctors are starting to work on opioid abuse and prescribing fewer opioids as they go along. Medicare set-asides, medical marijuana is not included by the federal government in considerations as a prescription at this time. It remains to be seen what happens in the future. And there's the shameless plug for a wonderful law firm that I work for. I will be around for questions later because I know I talked really fast because, like any good comedian, I knew there was going to be a red light coming up soon. Yeah, I'll let you do it.
Okay, now I have to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So I'm Mary Egan with Rosecrance, and this presentation really came about because him and I lived together. We had some conversation at the kitchen table about, number one, he was doing a presentation at a workers' comp conference and said, you know, you really have a role to play in having this conversation when an employer has a conversation with an employee maybe who has a substance use disorder. And the second thing was he had an employee who they had some concerns about, and he said, well, what do you do? How do you have this conversation? So it's one of the reasons this conversation and this presentation came to be. You know, marijuana was legalized in 2020. And, you know, at the time as an alcohol and drug counselor, we thought, you know, to ourselves that our society was going to be experiencing this cultural shift, you know, in 2020. And little did we know that 2020 was going to bring us COVID and everything that went along with that. A couple things that I wanted to mention that Jim did not mention is that, you know, the tax rate is pretty high with the legal marijuana that's out there. And so it says, you know, from 26 to 41%. The black market's going to continue. There was a presentation on 60 Minutes actually this past Sunday about this as well. In terms of possession, you know, residents of Illinois can possess up to 30 grams or about an ounce of the cannabis flower or about 5 grams of the concentrate. We're going to talk a little bit about that and how marijuana has shifted and how people use and the kind of substances that are available to people. In terms of edibles, a person can possess 500 milligrams of THC, the chemical that gets you high. So we'll talk a little bit about edibles too, because you consume it and the effects don't occur as quickly as when somebody smokes or vapes it. So cannabis at work, Jim's talked about that. You know, the part of the conversation that I would like to talk about is that how do you help an employee that maybe is experiencing some problems? What are the next steps? You know, as an alcohol and drug counselor, we know that there are millions of Americans in long-term recovery. An addiction is a disease and people can receive help. And so what are the next steps? How do you help someone with a problem? And as an employer, you have a role to play because you can help somebody connect the dots to the fact that they have a problem and to the resources that are available. Things that I want to talk about and clarify is that, you know, cannabis is a substance that, you know, makes you high. It changes your perceptions, mood, and behavior. THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, is the substance that produces the high. We hear a lot about CBD, or cannabidiol, and that produces the sedative or anti-anxiety effects. And so shift that we've seen is that, as marijuana has been cultivated, people like the experience of the high, and so the products are developed that have higher and higher THC content. And there are less, when you have higher THC, you have less CBD in the product. And so the CBD has the moderating or protective effect on some of the negative effects of marijuana, and the CBD has the medicinal value. The other thing about CBD, we see a lot of products. You can certainly obtain it, a medical product, but you also see CBD products, in gas stations and quick marts and those kinds of things. And there's not regulation out there about CBD. Be labeled CBD, it can still have 3% THC. So for people who are drug tested, I guess conceivably you could certainly test positive if you're taking CBD with THC in it. The other thing, there's not the regulation, in terms of, some products probably have very little CBD, even though it's labeled that. And I've seen studies that have provided evidence for that. So the other change that we see in terms of marijuana is that, the potency has increased so much. So, years and years ago, it was very minor, limited amounts of THC, 2 or 3%. Now it averages up, 65%, and some products we've seen, as high as 90 or 95% of THC. The other thing, there's lots of products available that have marijuana or THC. So it's not just, the old-fashioned marijuana weed, but we have oils and edibles and wax and concentrates. And so the higher the potency, the concern is that there's a longer period of impairment. So somebody could, consume an edible in, the morning and might still be experiencing the effects throughout the day. And there's also greater potential for side effects and addiction. So in terms of when somebody inhales cannabis, usually those effects peak in about half an hour and continues to taper off for 2 to 3 hours. When you swallow or eat or consume edible product, it peaks in 2 to 3 hours. So there's the slower buildup, and it tapers off, from 4 to 12 hours. So the effects are a lot longer. And so, the thing that Jim talked a little bit about is that, THC metabolites are fat soluble. So the THC stays in your system for a longer period of time. And so, does a positive test for THC indicate impairment? There have been some studies with driving and that say that it has. Obviously, we need a lot more research. There was also a pilot study with airline pilots, a classic study where they had pilots fly a flight simulator, not under the influence. Obviously, they performed well. They had them use some marijuana and then fly the flight simulator, and as you would expect, they didn't do so well. They had them go home and the next day fly the flight simulator again, and the concerning part of that was that they missed the center of the runway. One pilot didn't even hit the runway, and the other part that was concerning was they were not even aware that they were impaired at that point. So we know there's some impairment after somebody has consumed and when that THC has built up in your body and brain, but we just need more research. So what is a substance use disorder? What we want to talk about is that just because someone maybe uses alcohol or drugs, it doesn't mean they have a problem, but that, certainly for some people that, a certain percentage of the population does develop a substance use disorder, and it impacts all areas of their life. So as an alcohol and drug counselor, there are 11 things that we evaluate, and I wanted to just review these so that you're aware of what are the things that we look at in terms of diagnosing a substance use disorder. So the first one is taking the substance in larger amounts or longer than you meant to. So this is somebody who might start out using marijuana and oh, I'm just going to use on the weekends. I'm not going to use during the week. But they continue then, you know, to develop a pattern that maybe it's then, you know, multiple times a week. Maybe they'll say, I'm not going to use in the morning before work. And then it becomes, you know, a pattern where then they're starting to use more often. Number 2, wanting to cut down or stop using the substance, but not managing. Well, sometimes people will say, oh, I'm not feeling the effects as much anymore, so maybe I should cut down. Maybe my spouse is on my case. Maybe I'm concerned that my employer's, you know, concerned, and so I better cut down, but not quite managing to do that. Number 3 is spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from the use of a substance. So that's when the substance is becoming a bigger part of your life. So, you know, it's the friends you hang out with, the people you're with, you're either using or recovering from use, and the healthier things in your life start to fall away. Number 4 is cravings and urging to use. You're thinking about it. You have those physical cravings you want to use. 5 is not getting things done at work, home, or school because of substance use. Again, like I said, you know, the other things in your life begin to fall away, and the substance use becomes more of a, you know, a bigger part of your life. Number 6 is continuing to use even when it causes problems in your relationships. You know, when somebody else is starting to notice that it's a problem and talking to you about it, and you're still continuing to use. Number 7 is giving up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of use. You know, it's, as I mentioned, becoming a bigger part of your life. Some people will refuse to even look, they need a job, you know, but certain companies drug test, so they're not even going to apply there because, you know, they want to continue their use of marijuana. Number 8 is using substances again and again, even when it puts you in danger. So this is when you're using, when it's impacting your health, using when you're driving, using when at work, using, you know, using it when you know it's not a safe situation. Number 9 is continuing to use even when you know you have a physical or psychological problem that's been caused or made worse by the substance. You know, we'll talk a little bit about that. Substance use occurs with mental health conditions. So, you know, you might have a health condition as well, like diabetes or asthma, and you're continuing to use despite the, you know, medical recommendations that you don't. Number 10 is needing more of the substance to get the effect you want. That's tolerance. So somebody who is going to use more and more marijuana, or just starting to shift from low potency to high potency products, is a symptom of tolerance. And the last one is development of withdrawal symptoms that can be relieved by taking more of the substance. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, with what that looks like with marijuana. So if somebody has 2 or 3 symptoms, what that means is that they have a mild substance use disorder. And what that means is, you know, they could benefit probably from some workplace interventions, maybe some counseling. You know, just because somebody has a substance use disorder doesn't mean they need, you know, inpatient treatment. 4 or 5 symptoms indicate a moderate disorder, or 6 or more indicate severe. So as an alcohol and drug counselor, we take a look at the totality of these symptoms, along with addiction and American Society of Addiction Medicine criteria, and make recommendations as to what kind of help or treatment somebody would benefit from. Now, the challenge is that this statement, I think, is a powerful statement. Most people who engage in harmful substance use do not fully recognize that they have a problem, or that their life problems are related to their use of alcohol or drugs. So what happens is that, you know, addiction is a brain disease with behavioral symptoms. Often the people around the person with the disorder starts to see that there's problems. The person themselves with the disorder either doesn't see it, or it's hard to admit to oneself. I have a colleague in the field who is in recovery, and the way she put it to me is that if she admitted herself, like she knew she had a problem, but if she started to talk about it to other people, then she would have to do something about it. And that's a big step. So we're going to continue to talk about how employers can play a role in helping someone recognize they have a problem and make that connection to change and resources. So signs and symptoms. You know, early, the beginning of use, like we talked about, it might take some hours for the effects to peak. There might be rapid, loud talking in the beginning, sleepy in later stages. And one of the key things about marijuana is it impacts short-term memory. So people might be forgetful in conversation, having that slowed reaction time. Also the perception of time and speed. One of the field sobriety tests is to count to 60, and people are off with that. There's the odor, it's the skunk-like scent. Years ago, I worked in, some of the staff I worked with in a school didn't know what marijuana smelled like, and we had to bring in some of these little incense type things to, introduce people to the smell of marijuana. So, the thing also about marijuana, it impacts your ability to do complex tasks. Jim was talking about, in the workplace. And so anytime that, like here it says, the tendency to drive slowly, but you think about it, like when you drive, you have to be able to gauge time and distance and speed and interact if somebody pulls out of the side. And marijuana, there have been studies that say that it does interfere with the ability to drive. For the additional effects, with the high potency of marijuana, we're seeing more panic attacks and hallucinations and psychosis. There's been an increase in ER admissions. People have heart palpitations and arrhythmias, and that is the impact of using this higher potency marijuana. In terms of withdrawal signs, people have said to me through the years, well, marijuana's not physically addiction, it's only a psychological addiction. Well, that is inaccurate. Marijuana does have a physical addiction, and as evidenced by these withdrawal signs, but it's a milder physical addiction than, say, like a heroin or other opioid. But some of the withdrawal signs include mood changes, irritability, restlessness, headaches, sleep difficulties. A lot of times people talk about insomnia that includes these, and then vivid dreaming, that once your brain starts to it's been dulled by the marijuana, once it starts to kind of come back life, so to speak, your brain starts to have these dreams, increased feelings of depression, gastrointestinal distress, decrease in appetite, and sweating and chills. So addiction is a disease. One of the things I like to continue to say is that I think there's still some attitudes in our society and stigma related to the fact that people think that if, you should just be able to stop, right? If you see it's a problem, you should just be able to stop using. Well, that's not, it's hard, and it can be a challenge for people to stop. And one of the reasons, and I wanted to take you through this, is that the brain disease, how that works is that when somebody uses a drug or alcohol, it causes this upsurge in dopamine. And dopamine is the feel-good chemical in our brain. And so, you start to feel good. And so as somebody continues to use again and again and again, the dopamine then only is released when they're using, and the brain doesn't experience or is blunted the response to normal stimuli. So the things that normally make us feel good, like you know, love and friendship and good food and sex and all those things, it doesn't happen anymore. The reward circuitry is dulled and desensitized by drugs. And so then use is not about feeling good. It's just about feeling normal. So you understand the compulsion to use at that point when somebody just needs to use to feel normal. So the point that I wanted to make is that substance use disorders co-occur with mental health conditions, and so you know, they go hand in hand together. There is this research that says psychosis is, you know, people who use marijuana, for example, have 5 times greater use risk of psychosis. So what to do when you are concerned about an employee? So you want to recognize the workplace warning signs. So, you know, as we've talked about, appearance changes, lack of dependability, declining quality of work, attitude changes, questionable judgment, and those signs and symptoms we talked about. The role of the employer is that you are going to be putting the pieces together. Often I have a colleague who used to say that, you know, we spend more time together with our workplace colleagues than we do our own family. So the employer has an important role to play in terms of identifying some of these signs of a potential substance use disorder. As Jim talked about, you know, you need to know your policy in terms of training on signs and symptoms of drug abuse, marijuana, or others is something that Rosecrance can help and provide for you. When you have identified a concern and you want to talk to an employee, you want to be very specific. I think Jim said articulable symptoms, you know, what you are observing. And you want to do that as soon as you start to identify that. You know, the more that you delay, then the problem can consider. And I think sometimes the mistake that people make is that they think, well, if I have a conversation with John Smith, he'll get it that I'm concerned and he'll stop. Well, that's not always the case. You really need to document and clarify your expectations of what you expect. So, you know, what is in your policy? What are the next steps? How are you going to follow up again, you know, in a week, 2 weeks, a month? You know, did you follow up with the EAP? Did you go get an assessment? All of those things, so that, you know, you and your employee are very clear about what's going to be happening. You also want to use what we call I statements, which is, it's a communication tool, and it's where you as the employer, you're identifying the concerns, and you can say things like, I noticed after lunch, you know, there's been a change in your performance. You know, I'm concerned about possible substance use. There's an odor of marijuana. And so you want to be able to say that in a non-judgmental way, but to be able to focus on your observations. These 3 P's, the productivity and performance and professionalism, are really what you want to focus on. You don't want to rush to diagnosis. Just, you know, if somebody's used in the workplace, it might be a sign of a potential use disorder, but it might just be poor judgment as well, or lapse in judgment. So you want to be able to provide that guidance and direction. What are the next steps? And to provide the support. Because if an employee is experiencing a substance use disorder, you can play an important role in connecting them to help and kind of, you know, capturing their life back. So the other thing, you know, people aren't always going to be open to these conversations, right? Few of us accept this criticism or accept any criticism well. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, if you bring up this topic, people, it's hard to talk about, because then you have to change. And so change is hard for all of us, regardless of what the issue is. So, you know, we have to continue to stay on the path of, you know, I'm concerned, and these are the steps, and what needs to happen. The other thing I think is that there's a lot of guilt and shame regarding a substance use disorder. People think they should be able to stop, and there's always this moment when they realize they can't, and it's a powerful moment, you know, when we see that with our clients. And so, you know, we have to continue to stay on the path of connecting them with resources, and understand that recovery is possible, and that we can help them to get to that point. In terms of public health recommendations, you know, there's the public health people are telling us that, you know, the best way to avoid the risk is to not use. The earlier someone starts to use, there's greater risk. If you have, you know, children or teens that use marijuana, and we talk a lot, we do lots of presentations about the impact on their brain and their health. And so, you know, there's no safe level of cannabis use for driving. And those who are at greater risk have a family history or a mental, maybe a mental health diagnosis as well. So, you know, in terms of interactions, you want to be able to talk about these issues with your employees, you know, and provide the steps and the practical help, and understanding that they might not want to receive help, but you have to continue on the path. You know, people do get better. And as an employer, you want your employees to be 100%. And, you know, if we look at a substance use disorder or addiction as something, you know, the stigma is, you know, you're a loser or something like that, we're not helping the employee to, you know, get help. How Rosecrance can help is that we offer assessments, and an assessment is a conversation with somebody who has some maybe symptoms of a substance use disorder, or an employer can refer to Rosecrance. One of the things that we like employers to know is that our clients have the right to privacy, and there's lots of regulations about how their privacy is protected. However, if you are referring them to us for the assessment and you want to know what the recommendations are, you know, you can require or ask that your employee can give us the recommendations, give you the recommendation to give to the employer. We don't have to tell you everything that they've said, but we want to be able to sign that release of information, be able to talk with you, because we're concerned as well about how is this, you know, their use evidenced in the workplace. And so understanding that maybe the client might not be telling us the whole truth. So we want to collaborate with you. But understand that the clients, that when they come to us and how we operate, is that there's some protection. So anything we can do, you know, in advance or in cooperation and communication to understand that to the employee that we want to be able to communicate with each other is the best way that we can help that employee. So, and as Maureen has talked earlier, you know, we do have treatment resources. Not everybody's going to need residential treatment. There's lots of steps, you know, and options that someone can have. We do have a website. I like our tagline that life is waiting. You know, recovery is possible. And, you know, an employee can reclaim their life, and, you know, we're here to work with you and support you. There's a lot of resources on this website as well. So that is the presentation. So we have about 5 minutes left for questions. So Molly, have you received any questions?
So we don't have any in the chat, but if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask questions to either Jim or Mary, and we will take questions now. I know I had one for Jim, actually. So
Here, he's coming back.
so I understand the importance of a zero tolerance policy. However, one of my questions is, there are times when it is appropriate for alcohol to be in a work environment, for example, like at a mixer or, you know, an event. How do you work something like that into your policy manual?
What happened to my? You have to be aware of it, that there's certain situations. That's the conundrum that you have to deal with. I'm not 100% certain, to be honest with you, how you would consider that in an employment manual, because you'd have to carve out the Christmas party and so on and so forth, things like that. What's becoming more and more prevalent, to be perfectly honest with you, is liability concerns, where if people are at a Christmas party drinking and drinking to excess, you could be held liable as the employer for the accident they get into thereafter. So, and we're guilty of it at my firm, with, you know, for the annual Christmas party. You know, we don't put restrictions on people other than be smart. We've bought a lot of cabs. We've Ubered a lot of people home, things like that. You have to make it clear that participation in any event like that is voluntary, and some kind of after-work mixer, a Christmas party, a retirement party. The way it would be treated, it would be that this is voluntary. You are not required to attend. We're certainly not requiring you to drink or anything like that, and that would be the way to shield yourself from liability as best you can in that instance. I have not written an employer's handbook in a long time, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit with it. But we've talked about it in different situations, and as I said, it has to be laid out as a purely voluntary event, and you should be you shouldn't be buying, you know, a 12-pack for someone to consume all by themselves. You know, Jim doesn't get to drink a fifth of bourbon while he's at the party, no matter how much badly he might want to, that kind of thing.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. That makes sense.
Phew.
So just really quickly, again, in the chat, Jennifer said, I don't have any questions, but thank you for all of this information. Really good stuff. So I would agree. This is a lot of very valuable information. And so I thank you both. Any other questions that we have, just really quickly?
No, this is Nancy. I just wanted to say too that it was a great presentation. You know, it's nice to know, you know, the steps take, because sometimes we get clients asking us as well. So they'd have to form that policy, make sure everybody is aware of it before they moved on. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the opportunity. Certainly, if you have any questions, our contact information.
All right. Well, as we said before, this will be on our website, so you can refer to McHenryChamber.com, and also reach out to Rosecrance if you have any questions. Jim's information for his firm is on the slides, so we'll make sure that that's up there too. And then any supporting information we can get from Maureen and put that up there as well. Thank you all for attending, and thank you so much, Jim and Mary.
Thank you.
you.
All right, take care.